And as a kid, I used to sit by the stereo system. Back then they had something called a hi-fi. And my dad would play all his jazz albums. And I think I must have been about maybe 5 or 6. And that was my introduction to jazz. And I thought that was the only type of music there was. And what drew me to the jazz music were the album covers. So I would, whenever he would put a certain artist on, he would have the album cover up front, leaning up against the stereo. So I would grab it and look at it. And I was really fascinated with the art and, you know, the pictures. And I could somewhat read, but mostly I was drawn to the visual of the album covers. There was one particular album he had out. It was called The Cat by Jimmy Smith, a jazz organist. And it's so funny, when he was playing this album, the whole time I was listening for a cat, to see if I could hear a cat. So the byproduct of that is I listened intensely at the music, the different instruments and stuff like that. So I think what it did, it kind of embedded in me the structure and the vocabulary of jazz at such an early age. So I didn't start playing saxophone until I was like in my 20s. But I already had that jazz vocabulary indoctrinated in me since I was a child. So I understood the language. So my younger brother played clarinet, because my dad, he kind of dabbled in music. He played clarinet. My younger brother lost interest in clarinet. So I said, hey, can I try it? So I started messing around with it, and I would play along with albums, different music, TV commercials, and stuff like that. This was when I was in high school, but I wasn't really taking it serious. It was just something that was curious to me, and I wanted to understand, you know, the relationship between instruments and music and stuff like that. So I took it to college with me. My brother let me take it to college with me. And I heard this album by a group called Steely Dan. And I heard this saxophone player on there, Wayne Shorter. Now, growing up, I heard a lot of saxophone players listening to my dad's music, but for some reason, this guy was different. And I was like, wow, I like the sound. I think it was Deacon Blues. I think that was the song on the album. And I'm playing along with the clarinet. I says, I got to get rid of this clarinet. It doesn't sound like that. So I went to a pawn shop near college, and I bought a old beat-up Conn saxophone for like maybe $200 or $300, you know, which was, you know, most of my money. And I brought it back to my room, and I started playing along. Like I said, just for my own enjoyment. And funny thing is, I would go in the stairwell of my dorm where I could get that reverb. And I'm in there just playing, just practicing, and I hear this door at the top of the step open and close, open and close. And I turned and I looked, and there was like 20 students sitting on the stairwell listening to me play. And I was like, and they started clapping. So that was the first inclination that I got that I possibly was doing something that people enjoyed. But I never really, you know, pursued it until later on. So fast forward, after I left college, I came to Florida because my dad worked at the Space Center. He says, you need to try to get a job out here. So he was able to get me out there. had my own apartment. It was in Titusville. So now I got my own little apartment. I got my nice stereo system, and I would play along to albums. One in particular, it was by a keyboard player named Joe Sample. He had a group called the Crusaders. So I'm playing, trying to learn all this stuff. There was no sax in it, so that made it easy for me to like improvise. So I'm playing, and I see people walking by my apartment window because I was, it was a first level. And I stopped, and I walked to the front door, opened the door, and there were about 15 to 20 people sitting out on the grass in front of my apartment with blankets, wine, cheese, and crackers. and I was like, oh my God. So I went out and talked to a couple of people, and one particular guy said, hey, listen, my friend's having a birthday party. Would you like to play in the clubhouse? I'm like, okay. So what I did is I hooked up this little rig where I played a cassette, and I played along with the cassette boombox and everything. And that's when I realized, I might have something to offer. So later on, fast forward again, I started practicing a lot of jazz. So there is a place in Orlando called Lake Eola, and they have the big band shell. Well, I got to know the maintenance supervisor out there, and I asked her, I says, do you mind if I come out here and just set up and just play? She says, oh, no problem. It's a little cafe right there, just set up next to the cafe. So I went out there, and the purpose was to see or to validate that I had something that people was interested in. So I come out there, I had my Jamie Aebersold music on a cassette player. I had it piped through a little speaker, and I got a nice little crowd. I wasn't going out there to make any money, but people started giving me tips. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. So from that point, I started going out and doing solo gigs in Orlando. I'd play at different hotels and stuff like that. Just to give you a reference on the time frame, all this stuff happened in the early 80s. So I would dare say I was one of the first musicians that was out there playing to tracks. Most of the performers out there had bands, but I hadn't, advanced to the point to where I could get together with a bunch of guys and go out there and play. So I did tracks for quite a few years. I played out at Disney, SeaWorld, and I started building a repertoire of music. And back then, the music that I was performing was basically classical jazz, jazz standards and stuff like that. And I did that for a number of years, and then I got an offer to perform at a jazz festival. And I says, man, I need to put together a band. They had a jazz festival in West Palm Beach, Florida called Jazz Fest. So I knew a couple of musicians, and I got some guys together, and we did the Jazz Festival. We opened up for Michael Bublé, who's a Canadian jazz singer, guitar player, Earl Klug. And that pretty much put me on the road to trying to establish bands. So I did some gigs in Brevard County. There was a jazz club called Big Daddy Dave's Jazz and Blues Club. Now I had been doing my tracks there, and I was basically doing the classical jazz format. And It's funny, there was only like maybe 4 people in the audience. One was Dave, the owner, and another guy sitting at the end of the bar playing chess with another guy. And then it was me, and I had a sound man, helping with me with the equipment. So I approached Dave and I said, Dave, do you mind if I put a band together and come back? So I went out and I assembled some of the guys that I did the Jazz Fest with. And Dave says, just let me know when you're ready. So I called him up. I said, hey, Dave, I got a nice band, and we're going to come back there and perform. So at that stage, I switched from the classical jazz to the smooth jazz. Because the musicians that I assembled, they weren't really classical jazz musicians. They were like R&B. So, the smooth jazz kind of, fits into that genre. So I contacted Dave, and Dave posted in Florida Today, which is a newspaper in Brevard County, engineer forms new jazz band. And I was terrified. I says, oh, what in the heck have you done? Because I just wanted to just slide in there and, be incognito, but he spread it out all over the county. So the day that we were supposed to play, we went up, set up the equipment and everything, and got everybody set. And I went downstairs. There was a line down the stairs around the block. And I come back and I says, oh man, what have I done? But it turns out that we were a hit. And we actually played there for like 3 or 4 years. And then once, unfortunately, Dave passed away, they turned it into something else, and I ended up, playing different places again, around town. So I was looking for venues that would, I guess, be into this new vibe that, I've created with the smooth jazz band. And, one thing led to another. I end up, as time went on, I put together different bands. I've actually had about five bands in total. Because, you lose some people and you want to, kind of change your format. But I discovered what worked for me and what worked for the area. Even though they had jazz in Brevard County, it was like the classical jazz type stuff, and a lot of people weren't really into that. So after playing for quite a few years in basically Central Florida, I saw the opportunity to do more in Brevard County because, there was country and blues and rock and things like that, but I didn't see the type of jazz that I was trying to push was the smooth jazz that I felt appealed to a larger audience. So I connected with a lot of the musicians, in Brevard County, and there were quite a few young musicians coming back home from college and stuff like that, and I was in a position where I was able to give them opportunities. So I had a lot of those different musicians work with me, and a lot of them went on to, to do their own thing. But Brevard County, I felt, was a little more appreciative of what I had to offer. Not that Orlando did, but you had so many musicians over there, you could get lost, in the shuffle. But coming back to Brevard where I lived, I really focused on trying to introduce, jazz to the community. Now, I didn't want to become a cover band. So what I started doing is developing my own style of jazz. I released 2 CDs with my own material, and I actually, without a record label, I actually sold over 100,000 CDs. And that is what catapulted me into the position to help others. And during that time, the scene started opening up. There were clubs that were looking for this particular type of jazz. I call it smooth jazz. Some people, may not call it jazz, but the fact that it has that improvisational element to it is why I like to prefer, to it as jazz. Doing this since the early 1980s. So over the years, as I've been able to establish a bit of a reputation, I decided to put on a couple of jazz festivals. The one that I'm really proud of, it was the Indian River Jazz Festival. And the first one I put on was in early 2000s. I had 15 bands, and that included the high school jazz, 2 high school jazz bands. So I did that twice, and I'm proud to say that a lot of musicians that I featured in those jazz festivals went off to do their own thing and actually became, major players. There's one guy in particular that I featured. His name is Don Soledad. He's a flamenco jazz guitarist, and he's done quite well. Had a couple of opportunities that I gave to other musicians. For example, a saxophone player by the name of Carl Lewis. Yes, that's the one that I had at one of my festivals. And I gave a couple of, jobs to him in order to help him break out. So now he's doing quite well. Because see, I understood that I can't do it myself. In order to keep this thing going, you have to introduce new blood into the music scene. And I'm proud to say that a lot of these musicians that I help, usher into the jazz scene, they're doing quite well. And now I'm trying to work smarter, not harder. So it's not like I'm out there hustling, trying to get every gig that comes up. I'll call people and say, hey man, so-and-so is looking for a group or a sax player or something like that. And the fact that musicians are using tracks, you're able to go into places like restaurants and hotels and still give a quality, performance. So I'd like to say I was the pioneer in ushering in the solo musician with backing tracks. I used to get teased a lot back in the day. They used to call me a karaoke sax player, but now you go to these different venues and there's a guy using backing tracks. So it's very popular now, and due to the fact that the economics are not where it should be, guys can still make a living, performing music. And as I mentioned earlier, I released 2 CDs. My first CD, there's a song on there called It Happened One Sunday. I was very active in the church scene, performing on Sundays. And this one particular time, I was backing up the choir, and I got this epiphany that through my music, I would be able to reveal you know, my blessings and the fact that with God's guidance, He would open up doors that I would be able to, you know, share that goodness. So I've been given the opportunity to re-record that particular song, and that's the history behind this song, far more than I could have ever imagined. And the fact that I've been able to open doors for people, I've been able to reach people, you know, through my music, is confirmation that what I'm doing is what I was gifted to do. Featured on this song is Cameron Brown playing flugelhorn. Cameron and I do quite a few gigs together. Featured on bass and guitar is Pete Balchunas. On drums, I have Brian Gardnauer. On percussion, I have Angel Rios. On keyboards, Clinton Hatcher, done in high definition, so top quality recording. And I hope you enjoy it.